What we're going to do this morning is Akasati and I are going to have a conversation in public, as it were, you being the public. So the genesis of this is rather long-winded, so I'm not going to bother you. It went through various combinations and ended up being us. So this is what we have. And the idea is that we're just going to have a conversation for a while, for probably about half an hour actually, and then we're going to open it out to see whether there are any questions that any of you would like to ask, either Akasati or I, on the basis of what we've been talking about, or anything else really. And then we'll finish with that, okay? So that's the kind of format. So I'm going to introduce Akasati to you, and then she's going to introduce me. So I was thinking about I've known Akasati for a long time actually. I think probably when you were a Mitra, I probably first met you in order Mitra events or on retreats. But I felt like I really got to know you better around 2006. 2005 or 6, which is when some of us were working together trying to raise awareness within the ordering movement of social issues, particularly around the ecological. And where we worked together probably first, or one of the first things, was what became known as the Nojo retreat, so which was a retreat at Taraloka, which a team of us were going to do with Joanna Macy. So she and I were kind of co-leading it, and we had a really good team. And then she got a very bad asthma attack and couldn't come. So we cancelled. We had to let everybody know who'd booked, which was over 40 people, men and women. And I think about 37 of them still came. So rather than it being something which Joanna Macy was fronting, we just took it on as a team. We had to completely rethink the whole retreat, and it was Maitri Sara was involved in that, and Guki Patti and Akupa, and Akasati and I, and it was quite intense actually, because we had quite a few of you in this room were on that retreat actually. It was fantastic. It went down in the annals of history actually. So I got to know Akasati in that, and I was really impressed then, and have been since, by Akasati's thoughtfulness. You know, you strike me as somebody who really thinks about things. You don't kind of just come out with cavalier statements, but that when you do speak about something, it's coming from quite a weight of experience and thought. So I've always kind of quite appreciated that. And also I've appreciated your desire to, say around the ecological kind of issues as a blanket umbrella statement, to really be interested in what the world needs from that point of view, and I might pick that up later on in the conversation. But so I'm an admirer, and I've enjoyed the things that you've written in Shabda, and over the last few months you've written quite a few things which I think have been quite thought-provoking, so I want to pick up some of the themes from those in our conversation.
Thank you. This is Parami. I expect the words "needs no introduction" have been said many times before. There's a lot I could say, but I think really just a sense that you've been around the whole time that I've been part of this movement, which is about 30 years, astonishingly. And I maybe broke the mould suggests that there is a mould, which of course there isn't, but maybe in my mind there was a mould of what a sort of practicing Buddhist would look like, maybe very quiet and sort of probably a bit introverted, and I don't know, you don't even sort of quite know what the view is until somebody doesn't fit it, but I think I sort of never quite broke out of that always, and I just always delighted in that all the way through, and it was really lovely those years in the redwoods. Redwoods have roots that are interconnected under the ground, and that was the image that came up. So
that and the shambolic warriors. The shambolic. Yes. Was the Glaswegian bit.
Yeah. So Parami sent me an email saying the panel had turned into a conversation between the two of us, which I found quite hard to imagine, and it took me about 5 minutes over breakfast to tell my partner Dharmavajra that this had been suggested and that I'd said yes, because I was just laughing too hysterically to actually get the words out. So that was my initial response. We'll see how it goes from here.
Well, I'm very grateful that you were willing to do this. So, okay, so I'm going to get the first question in. So some of you were on the combined convention at Wyndham, and Viveka gave a talk there. And one of the things Viveka said, and it was something like, it might be nice to ask people what are the questions they would really like to be asked. So what are the questions you would really like to be asked, if that isn't cheating as a way to start?
That's great. I would like to talk about my experience of direct pointing as a way to insight, and it's actually lovely to be asked, because there's been a little bit of a process. You know, when you're very enthusiastic about something and you kind of bounce over people and they go a bit... So done a bit of that, and then also done a bit of kind of, oh, this is a little bit contentious, some people are wary, and so I've also done a bit of sort of, actually, I'm not going to talk about this unless somebody asks and they're definitely interested. And so it's good to be asked, because that kind of allows me to talk about something which I would really like to share
so I'll
with
ask you.
So yeah, there's quite a bit I could say, and I have written about it in Shabda as well, but I think I'll just try and kind of say the most important things, I guess, if I can, which is that, as I just mentioned, have been part of this movement for 30 odd years and have been, you know, practicing reasonably assiduously, possibly not as much as some others, but I think, you know, I've been in there consistently with the ordination process and meditation and so on. Been on many retreats, lots of study, and obviously I wouldn't be here if I didn't appreciate all of that hugely, and all of that has kind of got me to where I am now. But I have also been aware. I was ordained in 1999, and there was a sort of period, a really lovely period, going to Buddha Field, sort of, it felt a bit like the crest of a wave, and just a lot of things. I've been a mitra for donkey's years, so I was really kind of keen to get out there and do things that I wanted to offer. But I think after a while I did get a sense of feeling stuck, and that something, after all this practice and all these years, that there was something missing. Or I didn't even frame it in that way, but a stuckness. And I guess this interest in the direct pointing kind of came out of that, a sense of sort of looking for, there's something at the heart of this practice that I'm not getting. I've got the theory, but there's something more direct, the more direct experience that, there was a kind of insecurity, a sense that, I kind of know it, but I don't know it sort of feeling. And I'm not saying I know it anyway. So there was all the stuff about LU in Shabda, and that I can relate to people who feel confused and a bit odd about it, because I had a very similar response myself, sort of, what is all this? And then I met a couple of people who'd done that process, and also had some contact with Tejananda, who'd obviously been quite a key person, and I was just very impressed by a different quality that I discerned. And just a growing sense, I want to give this a go. So on a retreat, actually this time last year, I was at Vajraloka and started a process with Tejananda, and then carried on by email at home, back in my normal life, teaching, very hectic start of term, and that was a very interesting experience to be practicing that intensively, not on retreat, but in my kind of ordinary, everyday working life. So just throw that in, because I know some people think it's a bit odd, this sort of, how can you do that over the internet? And there's a lot to be said for face-to-face, but it's not always possible. And actually, the one thing about the online dialogue is that you're just at home in your normal life, and there was something very integrating about that. So the process, this is direct pointing to anatta. I suppose you could point at anything, but it's very, very focused, specific, and you just keep going with it until something shifts. And so, we've all done the 6 element practice, and I would say that's a kind of one aspect of looking at, the body is not the self. And I guess that we've all had experience around that directly. But I think the self expresses itself in other ways. So one can see that the body isn't the self, but still have a view that, the self is the person who decides, the one who experiences, various different permutations. And I think it's a bit like doubt. It's one of those views that kind of slides around and kind of pops up. It's like, you got it over there, and it sort of says, well, it wasn't quite that, and kind of comes out somewhere else. And I just thought it was a wonderful process, experience, and it is not like anything that I've done before. And I think the experience, the actual direct seeing after quite a while. Some people apparently are very quick, and some of us take a bit longer, and you just stick with it until something shifts. And there is a direct seeing. It's not the theory, it's the actual direct. It's not words, concepts, it's a direct experience, and that's what the process is aiming for. And I would say that I have not had that experience before, and I'm really glad that I've done this in my lifetime.
Great. Thank you, that's very clear. I'd like to ask you a couple of follow-up questions from some of what you've just said. Quite interested in you saying it's not like anything you've done before. So when you say that, do you mean the method is not a method that you've done before, or do you mean that it brought in something which was new within your practice framework? Do you see what I mean as a sort of difference?
Both, I would say. I mean, the method is interesting because we were talking earlier about there is some overlap with the ordination process where you're in a process where you're coming up against your views and your stuff, and other people are in that with you. Although even in the ordination process, most of us don't have the luxury of having somebody responding on a daily basis. I mean, it's an amazingly generous thing that Tejananda, in my case, was offering. So I think there's something about that. It's relentless, and I mean, the ordination process is also relentless. But this was kind of...
super relentless.
Sorry?
Super relentless.
Super relentless, yeah, it was actually. And I think it's very, very focused because it's all coming back to the same thing. So I hadn't really had that. I mean, I talked about it in Shabda in terms of Kalyana Mitrata, somebody engaging.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually, because I've got the quote from what you said, where you said, I understood the much quoted, friendship is the whole of the spiritual life, on a whole new level. One person understands something, they take the trouble to communicate it to someone else who in turn passes it on. This synergy is the story of Buddhism through the ages. It's not friendship on the level of being mates, it isn't personal, it's a profound sharing of something real between two human beings. I was very touched by that when I read it. So I wondered if you want to say a wee bit more about that. Yeah.
I think I put that
To
quite
say
well.
that. You did, you put it very well. It's good when you hear yourself quoted back.
It's a funny thing because it is quite impersonal in one way, but it's also I don't know if I can
Intimate.
actually. Yeah, it is kind of. You have to be very, very open and very honest, and I mean, people who go on LU, it's actually open. Anyone can read it, so that's quite. It's quite an exposing thing. I mean, we don't. If you do it by email, then that's not the case. But there's something really good in that actually, and I think if we brought it in, I think there are some things that we can learn from that setup that are very effective.
Well, as I say, I thought that particularly moved me when I read it, and it quite touched something in me. I want to just go back and follow a bit more, though, this thing about whether there's something new coming in. And I guess what's in the back of my mind is the recent Commonality paper. And not so much the paper, but the kind of, the thoughts behind that, or the need to find a way where things that are coming in which are new or seemingly new or are deepening of something, how do they come into relationship with the system of practice that Bhante's kind of laid out? Now, I think you could answer that in a very easy way and just say, well, it's an obvious spiritual death experience. But I wonder if you could say a bit more about how you perceive that. Because when you say, it was like nothing that you'd done before, then in a way one could, and I'm not actually hearing it like this, but one could hear it as it's something that's come completely, from left field and has nothing to do with the system that we've been practicing within. Whereas my own understanding, it's very much focused on one of the Lakshanas, that the three Lakshanas have been very much part of our discourse. Some of the quotes that Dhammadinna came, and the other day in your talk, Dhammadinna from Bhante, where he is at least pointing out to that. So it seemed to me that, do you feel that in a way you can see the seeds of that, and then this method's giving you another way to work with? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Or is it?
Yeah, I do feel that. I mean, obviously, it's basic Dharma, isn't it? It's the Lakshanas, and it's what Bhante has been talking about, obviously, because it's basic Dharma. So it's not new in that sense. There's nothing new. And actually, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have heard that Bhante is a bit mystified why there's such a big fuss about it, because he doesn't seem to regard it as anything
particularly new. I think that's right.
What was new was the particular methodology basically follows that view around until you kind of nailed it. And I have not had that experience before. And I would say I have not had a direct seeing of that self-view is indeed nothing but a concept, an idea, a view, a belief, and seeing that very, very clearly, unequivocally, and it's just a shift, that cannot be unseen once it's seen, and that's what's new. In my case, what I now realise, we had an interesting little group yesterday, for some people, obviously, there is insight to experience from different sources. For me, I don't feel that has happened previously in that very clear way. And so there's a new understanding of all the Dharma.
Great. I mean, there's so much in this, Kirsty. I'd love to ask you lots more things about it.
I'm supposed to be asking
I
you
know,
some questions.
that's what I was just thinking. It's interesting, isn't it?
We don't
Okay, receptive mode.
Well, okay, if your mind does go blank, then I'll ask you some more particular questions. But following on from Viveka, this is not just laziness. I think I would be genuinely interested. Well, is there something you mentioned the area of commonality that you would like me to ask you about this moment.
Well, my mind did go completely blank when Viveka said that in her talk, and I thought, what it made me think at the time was that was probably a very useful question for people who don't often express themselves. And I suspected I didn't fall necessarily into that category. So I think probably most people know what I think about most things. But so then I thought, well, what are the areas which currently exercise my mind? And the commonality paper is one of those areas. So I could talk a little bit about that. I mean, I don't want to particularly focus on the paper that Subhuti sent out, but more the kind of principles behind that, I guess. And I'm curious and interested in how we can have an order in a community which is both open to influence and coherent. And I mean, I guess I'd be surprised if anybody said they weren't interested in that. But like where you put the balance in that and what are the ways of doing it, I guess, are the kind of areas in which questions could be asked. And well, two things that come to my mind were about a year and a half ago, a number of us went to Mais Gwyn, which is where Subhuti and Shrimala live. And we had a little group of us. There was Subhuti and Padmavajra and Vajrapushpa, Dhammarati, myself, Abaya and Sagramati, I think that was right. And Ratnadarni joined us for a few days. And we just talked around, the reason for coming together was what is Adhisthana's place in the order and movement. We just bought this place, we hadn't opened, we were up to here in a building site. And we realised we had to think about what we were going to do in this building site at some point. So Subhuti got this group of people together. In fact, what we ended up talking about was quite different. It was around unity and the future, and whether whether those of us in that group could see our way into how could we help have a unified order beyond Bhante's death. I guess that was the kind of point of it. And it was fantastically interesting. It was fascinating. And the direct pointing came up actually in that because Vajrapushpa, who I think has talked quite openly about this, had done that process. And so she was talking quite a bit about that, and all sorts of other things come in. And one of the things that came up as well was people in that room's relationship with Bhante, which was there was quite a varied range of people, from one or two people who are just, Bhante saved their life, there's no question about it, and he's their teacher, through to people who'd over the years had a much more complex relationship with Bhante. And it was very moving hearing that. Now, the reason why I bring that up was because I loved just sitting in a room with people and having that conversation. And out of it, I think something arose, which was, well, at the end of 5 days or 6 days, we of course wanted unity in the order. And whatever our personal relationship with Bhante was, of course we saw him as the teacher and the founder of this order and movement, and we wanted to serve that in any way possible. So I'd love to see ways of having that conversation throughout the order and movement. And for me, that's the way that we'll know how to incorporate new things, is by people being able to kind of talk openly about what they're doing and that be heard and held. But there was also a very, very clear sense of principle. There was a very clear sense of, well, some things will take us outside the order's remit or the order's provenance or the order's, well, to introduce a concept that's probably a bit Tibetan, a samaya of the order. What is it that holds us together as a community? And for me, that's those 4 lines of acceptance that we all take at ordination, at the public ordination. And I think to the extent we're practicing within that framework, then there will be unity and there will be space for openness. Sorry, I'm kind of slightly proselytising rather than answering your question, but it's kind of what's in my mind at the moment, really. Because I do have a little bit of a fear of that paper being taken in a way that I know it wasn't intended, which is a kind of much more closing down and much more of a kind of... and because I had those conversations at that event, a year and a half ago. And I was in that room with Subhuti, who gets very excited and loves to explore things. I'd love if that could come through, you know. So I think I want to just share that, in a sense. And yeah, maybe that's enough. It's one of the things that exercises me.
Well, I was going to ask a further question, and you've partly answered it, but something around what would you say to someone like me who's probably more concerned that it's going to sort of be too fixed than that we're all going to kind of fall apart. But
please don't go. I mean, seriously, that's what I'd say to people. Like, talk, stay related, I guess, you know, is the main thing. And I have had a number of conversations with people, even people that I've ordained myself, who've, on reading that paper, felt a sense of, oh gosh, do I belong in this community? And yes, they do belong in this community. And I think dialogue, I mean, there might well be people within the order who it would be better if they weren't in the order. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying that everything and that there are no boundaries or holding at all, but I think it's quite a broad church, as it were, if I can use that analogy. So yeah, I think what I would say is just talk, you know, keep in dialogue, talk to your preceptor, keep things alive. Because I think the worst thing that can happen is people assume something from reading that paper, decide on the basis of that, you know, I don't know, that they need to kind of move out of relationship, rather than I'd like to see people coming more into relationship because of it. Yeah. Yeah. And I trust, I mean, I have quite a lot of confidence actually that we can have those conversations.
So do I.
I see them, I have them, you know. So.
Having one now.
We're having one now, yes. Is it my turn now?
How are we doing for time? Are we going to...
We've got about 25 minutes left, so we could have another few, maybe just another little bit, and then open it out if people have things they'd like to ask.
Well, there was a further thing relating to the paper and to the series of papers that have come out, and it's that word disciple, which I know is quite problematic for some people, and slightly problematic for some people. And perhaps for other people, I include myself, just not a word I would have particularly used. It's not a word that I'm familiar with using and including to my private preceptor, who is Ratna Shuri, who I love dearly and respect massively, but I just never thought of myself as her disciple. So there's something, what is there anything you'd like to say to people who maybe
quite a lot really
find that difficult, and that sense that does that put one outside of the order? It's quite strong language being used around this.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just say I feel really sad, actually. Oh dear. I think my overall predominant feeling around this whole issue of discipleship is sadness, and it's sadness on a whole number of levels, really. I feel sad that people feel themselves to be put outside something because they can't relate to a term. I feel sad that they feel they've been pushed to relate to that term, and I feel sad that it's such a problematic area. I mean, for myself, it isn't a particularly problematic area. I think I've been involved in pan-Buddhist things for a long time. And people introduce me as one of Sangharakshita's senior disciples, and that's just, you know, I haven't minded that particularly. I know it's got Christian connotations and stuff. Actually, I sort of didn't even mind that in a way. I quite, just on a personal level, it didn't bother me. I was more freaked out by the thought I might have to have disciples when I first read that 2009 paper, and it was like the order consists of disciples, my disciples, and the disciples of my disciples, and I thought, oh, I don't remember signing up for that. But then in conversation in the college and Q&A, question and answers with Bhante, I felt happier about that because I felt what I was being asked to do was hold the lineage in a certain way, or those lineages that Bhante's talked about, of practice, teaching, inspiration and responsibility. And I feel I can do that, and I feel I can hold that, and I can be a channel for that in a certain way. So the people that I've ordained, I'm not asking them to be my disciples. You'll be relieved to hear, those of you that are in the room, in the sense that I'm not asking for a certain sign up for something. But I do ask you to hold me in the sense of somebody who, because of my ordination from Bhante, have the validity to ordain you, if you see what I mean. So I see discipleship in that kind of sense, that it's to do with ordination and preceptorness, shiphood, like being a preceptor. So I'm very happy with that. And in the 2009 paper, Bhante defined discipleship relatively carefully, which, if I can remember more or less, it was something like, follow my particular explanation of the Dharma, do the practices and the teachings that I've given you, and carry that on. It's something like that. I have no problem signing up to that. And my experience of conversations with people after this more recent paper is that most of the people I talk to don't have any problem with that either.
No.
In fact, they're doing it. They wouldn't be in the order if they didn't want to do that. So it's this word that seems to be a real block. So personally, I don't feel I need to push that word. I don't feel I need anybody to say they're happy to use that word, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I would be unhappy if they felt they couldn't sign up for what the connotations of that.
Yeah.
What it's actually unpacked into. So I feel sad, really. And I kind of feel sad for Bhante, actually, in a sense, because, when he was asked what it meant, people quoted back to him, but is a guru necessary? You said a guru wasn't necessary. Are you going back on that? And he seemed to say no, he wasn't, that he still felt that although he was saying we are his disciples, he still sees himself as our Kalyana Mitra. So he seemed to be able to hold that relationship in that way. So again, for me, I feel I can be that for the people I've ordained, as well as I can. I'll do that to the best of my ability. So, and also people have asked him, because what he said, he says in my relation to the order that I'm a Kalyana Mitra, and he said in 2009 he didn't see these two things as contradictory. But you see, the thing with Bhante is I think he is contradictory in the sense that he's a complex human being, and he's he's very pedantic in a certain way, in the best sense of the word. He's incredibly clear about how he wants to define things. And he'll say different things in different contexts. And what we do, I think, sometimes is take those contexts and try and fight them against each other. And the contexts themselves might be quite different. So I kind of feel sad that if reading the Commonality paper, people feel that not only are they rejecting a word, but they might have to, in doing that, reject their relationship with Sangharakshita. And yes, I'd be sad. I'm sad if that's what happens, because I think you can reject the word and hold the relationship. So yeah, rather a long answer.
Well, I'm glad I asked.
Well, I've got tons more questions I would ask Akasati, but I'm aware that we did say we would open it, so maybe we should do that now. And if there's nothing, then I could ask you more. Has anybody got in who'd like to ask either of us? No, that's it.
I just wanted to add something that Ananda recently said. Bhante had said to him they'd had a fairly substantial disagreement some years ago under Ananda Rocha Shabda.
Could you speak loudly, please?
Yeah, something which I interviewed Ananda recently, and he quoted something Bhante said to him that was exactly resonant with what you've just said. Basically, there'd been quite a substantial disagreement between them, and Bhante said to Ananda, friendship is more important than views.
Yes, if you didn't hear that, he said friendship is more important than views. Interesting.
Obviously.
It's obvious, really, isn't it? Because friendship's the whole of the spiritual life, and views have got to be dropped. There you go, I've answered it.
Thank you.
Quite a useful little precept to reflect on, I should think.
My Chapala's just put a hand.
Wondering if one of the ways, what you thought of the idea of one of the ways of sort of holding this new discussion about the direct pointing as a tool for a process that Bhante is encouraging, which is for us to become enlightened. So he's that's one tool, but I'm wondering if one of the ways might be to encourage a dialogue with people who have perhaps had insight experiences through the pantheon of practices that we have. So it sits alongside that. And I just wonder whether we perhaps haven't been confident yet in having that discussion, which would make this one not seem as alone.
Did people hear that? Because it was a good point. So, no, it's all right. So my Chapala was just saying, if I can just recap, if I got it right, that one way of holding this discussion about direct pointing is the fact that and you mentioned it, Akasati, that other people have had insight experiences through other ways, other methods, other modes, and creating ways of having dialogue between people on that basis. Which would mean that the direct pointing discussion wouldn't be such a kind of out there on its own sort of a thing. So I think that's a really, really good point. In fact, I was saying to you, wasn't I, or somebody, I think it was you, that one of the things that I think's been good about bringing the direct pointing discussion into relationship with the order is that it has brought insight, as it were, into highlighted or faster focus or more focused or something. So I think that is a really good idea. And I think there has been a bit of a reticence in people for all sorts of reasons, some of them good, some of them maybe misunderstandings, etc. Been a bit of a reticence to talk about those experiences. So I think, if we can find a way where those experiences can be, I don't mean normalised in the sense of dragging them down, but they're not out with the spiritual life, it's not unusual that people practicing within the kind of Dharma that we practice, we know the Dharma, and practicing within the way we practice, it's not unusual that we would see through the self, for example. So I can see that the direct pointing gives a very clear way into that. And it'd be good to dialogue with people who've had that experience in other ways.
I'd love to take an opportunity here just to mention when we talk about insight, or insight into anatta, that there are some assumptions about what comes along with that. And I think that's been one of the sources of confusion, irritation, polarization, etc. And I was quite interested, Daniel Ingram's, who some of you might have come across, he talks about the package fallacy, the idea that a particular insight, to use that word, comes along with total ethical purity, total positivity all the time, or a list of things, whatever that person would kind of like. And that's not necessarily the case at all. And Viveka talked about, mess, kleshas, chaos, and so on. And I think it's just great we're having this conversation, and we're starting to get a bit clearer what we're talking about and what we're not. Because, take the term stream entry, which seems to be completely loaded and unhelpful at this point, as far as I can tell. There doesn't seem to be any agreement about what it actually means. So, I think there's a whole conversation about, shall we define our terms? Shall we look at what we're actually referring to when we use a term? And Bhante, of course, is very good on this. But I think we need to do that for ourselves.
How do you see that as relating to the Bodhisattva ideal? Which is one of my questions.
See,
what you just said about stream entry and the definition of terms. Because it seems to me that when we use those terms, we're buying into a very particular kind of understanding of how the spiritual life progresses. And there's other ways of understanding the spiritual life. And for me, see, I mean, somebody quoted this back to me recently that I'd said to them I wasn't interested in stream entry. So it's not that I'm uninterested in the breaking of the fetters or that I'm uninterested in making progress on my path. It's more that it's not the framework that I've ever necessarily felt inspired by. So I've always felt much more inspired by the stream, in the sense that Bhante defined it in his talked about it in his 1999 talk, Looking Ahead a Little Way, where he talked about a stream of non-egoistic energy, a non-egoistic stream of spiritual energy, something like that. So I've been much more interested in thinking, well, I want to swim in that stream. I want to float down that particular river, as it were. So do they come into relationship for you?
Of course.
I mean, I thought they would. Sometimes it's good to make things explicit, I think.
I mean, I just say, I don't, the term sort of aspiring to be a stream entrant is not a particular framework that I've used. I was just using that as an example of, I think it's, if we're talking about approaching particular fetters and attempting to break through certain fetters, that's much more specific, and I think it's much more useful. I mean, this is a kind of basic thing that comes out in beginners classes, isn't it? That wisdom and compassion are two sides of the same thing, and if we don't develop the insight, we are in danger of perhaps getting into some slightly odd views where we're kind of subtly polishing up a self that is going to be a compassionate self, a self that can help more and more people. And that's a wrong view. That's not what it's about. And that is going to, wrong views always express themselves in ways that are a bit dissonant. So if you're in touch with reality and you're connecting with somebody, there's this sort of natural awareness, and compassion is connection, isn't it? It's that sort of understanding of it's not just the understanding, it's the experience of not being separate. And maybe we are very focused on the compassion side. I was looking at I've had 2 little wanders around the shrine over there, and my yidam is Manjughosha was given this little sword by Surita at the Combined Convention, and I don't think there is a Manjughosha in all of those rupas. And I was just having a little train of thought: Are we a bit over-focused on compassion
Vidyatara
at the expense?
Is there a Manjughosha on our shrine, Vidyatara? No. There you go, you're right.
Do we need to actually look more at this insight side in order to come into perhaps a more real compassion?
More real. What was the last one?
Karanagita tomorrow.
Compassion.
Compassion.
Okay, it's about 10 to 12, so we could maybe take another question. Taragita's had her hand up.
Well, it's in this area of direct pointing LU. That's not
I'll repeat it. I'll repeat the question.
It's more kind of an opening out, really. It seems to me that some of the difficulty could be in the area that people who do LU, they have a specific process and a specific outcome, and there's this gate or non-gate that people go through. I was interested in Parami talking about people experiencing insight in other ways through other practices in the order, which I'm sure is the case. But there isn't the same kind of simplicity of process and outcome. So that seems to complicate the discussion a little bit, because my experience of the general tendency in the order is that you don't pin it down in quite that kind of way. And LU is doing something quite radical in doing that.
Do you want that repeated over here? You heard it.
So I'm interested to hear.
I mean, I'm very grateful to LU, Elena and Ilona and all the others. And also, I'm very, very glad that I'm part of this context and that I have a broader understanding, a much broader understanding and a framework within which what they're doing just sort of slots in. It's not the main thing, it's part of a much bigger process. And I think what I would personally like to see is that we take some of the best things of what they've developed, which I think is absolutely brilliant, but yes, some of the language is quite kind of black and white. I don't find myself, it's not the way I would speak about that experience. And we have the Dharma, which actually covers all this ground and beyond. So self-view is the first of 10 fetters, isn't it? So there's and then there's the whole issue of selfing, which hasn't come up yet.
It hasn't, which is an interesting one. So it's I think perhaps sometimes you go on LU, there's an idea this is the big thing and that's it, and end of,
and that's just not true. Frankly, I don't think everyone involved with LU thinks that, but some people can sort of come across like that.
Yeah. Is it quick?
It's not a question.
Oh, okay.
Just to say that I haven't done LU, but I have done 3 months of a direct pointing course that Tejananda came up with, and for me, I found that invaluable because it broadened beyond. It was not just Anatta, it was also looking at Dukkha and Anicca. And for me personally, I value the breadth of that. And for me, I feel that has an incredible value. But in that dialogue format, which again is something that within 34 years in the order, I have never, I just feel so grateful to have had the opportunity to have that dialogue with somebody coming back to me about my practice, but in a broader context. And for me, with no outcome of any gates or relate to that language at all.
Thanks, Vidyashri. I think I'd like to kind of try and round off because it's almost 1. So the conversation's been quite a lot about direct pointing, and I think that's good because it is a topic in the air, as it were, of interest. And a couple of people have said it's the elephant under the carpet. I'm not so sure it's that under a carpet myself. But if it is, it's a carpet. It's not a carpet I'm particularly familiar with because it seems quite in the air, actually. So there's a couple of things I'd just quite like to say, and then if you want to add anything. So it seems to me that I'm really pleased that we've been able to have a dialogue around that. I appreciate your openness about your own process and also other people's kind of experience. And it seems that what I'm taking from that is that the process of direct pointing has really helped focus something which is to be found in the way Bhante's approached the Dharma, but it's given a particular way of coming at it through one of those fetters that's really helped. And as Vidyashri says, it's actually broader than that, the way Tejananda is doing it. It holds all the fetters, the 3 fetters. Well, no, actually, you're working with the fetters as well, because you are sort of working directly with self-view. But the 3 lakshanas. So, having said that, I think what I fear or have concern about in the whole issue is polarisation and people not being able to talk to each other, either because they've had an experience they don't feel able to share, or because they feel threatened by something that's being shared, on either sort of side, as it were, of that divide. I just would really hope that people can have those conversations. and that there's something of that can be fed into our order as a sort of, in a broader sense. There was something else, and maybe that'll do. So that's what I've taken from that particular kind of conversation. So thank you for that. And also that it's nobody. You're certainly not saying, and I haven't actually heard anybody say this. It's the end. Actually, that it means you don't have to worry about your ethics anymore, or you don't have to worry about relationships with others anymore. I've heard that expressed as concerns, but I've never personally come across anybody say it, if you see what I mean. But presumably there's a reason why people are concerned about that being said. So thank you for that, actually. So, would you like to say anything to close?
Perhaps I could respond to what you just said. Just a thought. How can I? Maybe because an essential part of, well, what this experience, in my case, how I could express it is something around what I'm looking for is here. It's here in this present moment. It's not somewhere else over there. And maybe I used to have that view more crudely, and it's become more subtle, but still sort of been, that view has still been there. And maybe there's something about the experience of, it really is here and now. It really isn't somewhere else. That then does change the relationship with other practices. So maybe ethics, there might be a sort of gradual move more towards the kind of natural morality, the sense of sort of, well, if one is alive and aware in the moment, you know, it's natural to take the other into account and so on, rather than as a discipline. So I think, there's so much to,
I know, and we have to stop
to have a dialogue about.
Well, thanks very much, Kashti, for your willingness.